You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Marie Gluesenkamp Perez represents Washington's 3rd District, which encompasses Clark, Cowlitz, Lewis, Pacific, Wahkiakum, and Skamania counties, and a smidge of Thurston County. It's a relatively rural district that has voted for President Trump 3 times. Somehow, she has been able to convince a good number of those Trump voters to also send her, a Democrat, to Congress. And that's put Gluesenkamp Perez in a unique and small club of Democrats being asked to diagnose their party's problems and come up with a vision for the future. So what does it take to lead from a vulnerable seat, and what are the lessons Democrats can draw from what's happening in Southwest Washington? One of those might be, we got to figure out a solution to the gerontocracy in Congress. And Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp Perez is here to talk about that and much more. Hi, Congresswoman. Thanks for being back on the show. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Libby.
So you've been doing this effort and fighting through your Appropriations Committee to address the issue of cognitive decline in Congress. Could you describe what you want to do first for folks so they understand?
Yeah, and I'll just start off by this is not about age. Some of our most productive and strong members are older. We want a representative body of all ages and all walks of life and experiences.
I use the gerontocracy word, not you, just to be clear. That was my word, not your word. Yes.
Well, it's like I was looking through the ethics. I have rules up, down, and sideways about what kind of hat I can accept as a gift. But there is nothing in the code about how to evaluate an ethics complaint that a member is no longer the one steering their ship as the elected member, but their staff is, driving the bus. And I think it's a small number of offices where this is called into question. We're not talking about unorthodox or kooky ideas. We're talking about significant, irreversible cognitive decline. And there's no criteria to evaluate that. So my amendment was really simple. It just said that the Office of Congressional Conduct will develop a standard with which ethics can then evaluate a complaint of ethics violation as it relates to members' ability to, perform the duties of their office. The Ethics Committee is different than every other committee in Congress. It is not determined or affected by who's in the majority. It is always split 50-50. My amendment does not change the Constitution, even if there was an ethics finding. The only 3 ways a member can be removed is to die, to lose their election, or to have 2/3 of the body vote to remove them, which is profoundly rare. I mean, you got to reach Santos levels of, to actually remove a member. And so it's serious. It's also about providing clear information for voters to use in determining who they're going to send to Congress. And I actually sent out a poll in my newsletter, clearly not scientific, but I think it's a good insight. 92% of respondents, I have 230,000 people subscribed to my newsletter, constituents, 92% of respondents said that this is a significant issue that needs to be addressed. And, I think for us to rebuild trust in confidence in government, addressing these issues of transparency and accountability are foundational.
I think that the example of President Joe Biden looms large for a lot of people, especially with the recent reporting about some questions around his cognitive abilities while he was in office. But we also have seen this in Congress for years. Dianne Feinstein, a Democrat senator who was in serious decline, but she stayed in office. Kay Granger, a Republican member of the House who was secretly in an assisted living facility and not casting votes for months. And nobody knew until a local outlet reported on it. Of course, there have been former staff members of Senator John Fetterman who've asked about the status of his cognitive situation right now. Do you worry that this could be weaponized by people who just don't like somebody's votes, for example? Because, I listed a number of examples that I think have very clear and public evidence behind them, not so much the Fetterman one. The Fetterman one, people say maybe these are just Democrats who don't like that he sometimes votes with Republicans. I mean, how do you kind of keep this from being politicized, basically?
Well, I think that the ratio of representation on the ethics committee is a really good inoculant against that. I think that currently, right, the current situation is that a member, somebody could call for a member to be removed. That it's not exercised now, and it's never going to be simple. You're not going to get two-thirds of the body to vote to remove a member. You can't get two-thirds of the body to agree that the sky's blue. And I think, yes, there are concerns. Like, I understand the weaponization concern, but it is deeper that, like, do people trust that our federal government is being driven by the elected member themselves and not their staff? And without addressing that, we are opening our country up to profound vulnerability and lack of confidence. That is a real threat to folks just walking away, I would argue, from, liberal democracy and elections themselves.
What did you hear from your colleagues on appropriations? Because this amendment was voted down using a voice vote. So kind of just batted aside. Did they take it seriously? Did you hear anything from them about why it was not considered more serious, more fully?
Well, I think there's a lot of the reporting does not show up in members, you know. I think the interns that compile the news clips for a member to review are structurally dissuaded from things that are critical of their boss's colleagues. So I think there's a bit of an information gap. There were certainly hard questions, and some people did take it as a personal attack. But a lot of us also recognize that this is a substantive issue. So I'm continuing to work with my colleagues to find partners in this.
What would that look like? Is there another place where this would be introduced, or what's next for this effort, do you think?
We're still evaluating that. There's a lot of questions about what is the sort of most probable, what is the most achievable. I introduced this as a ledge branch amendment, which is kind of the natural home for it. But we're still exploring if there are other places, or whether there's a path in a standalone bill as well.
You're listening to Sound Side. We're talking with Representative Marie Gluesenkamp Perez of Washington's 3rd Congressional District. Now, that 3rd District, Representative, is somewhere where you have been holding town halls. You've been getting some heat from the left on some recent votes. And I want to talk to you about a couple of those specifically in just a moment. But in a more broad sense, how do you approach your job right now? Because this is a time when the president is moving really fast to restructure the government. We've got tariff news on, off, different percentages on different countries every day. There is the stepped up ICE enforcement in communities. How do you view your role in Congress? Is it as a check on the president? Are you looking for places to compromise? What is your kind of vibe right now with how you approach the administration?
Well, fundamentally, it is, working to really try to get a representative input from my community. And I think that's one of the issues is that, if you're working 3 jobs and late for daycare pickup, you are not able to go to a town hall or write in. It's so far off most people's radar. And so I work really hard. That's one of the reasons I do these town halls all across all 7 of my counties, because you need to show up and try to hear as best as you can. And really digging deep on I think it's a fool's errand to sort of to orient it's looking for, like, where can you make the difference? What are the seeds of things? I'm in the minority. We're in the minority in the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. And it's a fool's errand to try to talk somebody out of their lived experience and say, like, that's not real. Let me show you this spreadsheet. I think the thing is to say, like, what is, we can agree there's a problem here. We can disagree about what the best solution to that problem is, but you can't just gaslight people into say that they're not seeing a problem. They're not seeing a decline in, economic agency or their power to start a business or raise a family or own land or a home. All those things. Like you shouldn't you shouldn't be trying to talk people out. You should, like, I work hard to listen and find ways to move those values and priorities here in DC. I don't think it's really effective for the DC scene to like inflict itself and replace the priorities that I hear from my community locally in Southwest Washington.
Let me ask you about one vote that caught a lot of people's attention. This was earlier in the year in April, the SAVE Act, the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. That was passed by the House. It hasn't been taken up by the Senate. It's unlikely to overcome a filibuster there. The bill would require people to show documentary proof of U.S. citizenship when registering to vote. Now, Republicans say that would safeguard elections. Democrats say non-citizen voting is a non-problem and that it would create barriers for people who want to register. Why did you vote for it?
Well, fundamentally, people in my community believe that only U.S. citizens should be determining the outcome of U.S. elections. And I, the data is clear. Like, for instance, in Oregon, I think something like 900 people were registered to vote who shouldn't have been. And about 30 of them, I believe, actually voted. So it's true in that sense. But it also comes back to like, do you believe that the existence is a threat to the integrity of the elections, or are you evaluating it on a scale question, on the actual outcome in the election itself?
Like Democrats saying it's so rare, basically.
It's so rare, it doesn't matter. And then you have a lot of Republicans saying the fact that it exists is a threat to the system and trying to weight that. But I think one of the things that's really been lost in a lot of the dialogue is that the SAVE Act included an attestation clause, which no one's talking about. You can sign, a statement that certifies that you are a U.S. citizen if you're not able to produce the documentary proof. And so a lot of the debate about who and how is mitigated through the attestation clause portion of that bill. But as you mentioned, it's been 8 months, or sorry, it's been like 3 months or so, and I think
I'm doing the math really fast. Yeah, 3.5 months. Yeah,
it
only feels like 8.
Every day is a dog year,
yeah.
Man.
But it's still getting attention, I think, because it's like an example of a way that you, a Democrat, have bucked your party. One way in recently that you voted with your party was against what's called the Big Beautiful Bill. Democrats
I hate that name so much.
Democrats would use a different adjective. I'm sure beautiful would not be among them. This would included big tax cuts, funding for border security in the military, cuts to food aid, and more than $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid. Now, Democrats were universally opposed, but I know for you take a more nuanced approach than maybe some other members of your party about border security, fentanyl, things like that. You've talked about that being a huge issue in your district. So I wonder if the vote against the BBB, was that a tough vote at all for you?
No, I worked hard to try to build a bipartisan process there. I was relentless in trying to do something productive for our country. And the thing that really pisses me off about this is that it's a bill oriented around, taking stuff from the bottom 10% and, stuff on the top, 0.1%. And if you're, in the 89.9% of the middle, you're ignored. Like, ignoring 89% of the country is a dumb way to run an economy. And what it does do is saddle the middle class with $4 trillion of debt. And I feel like a lot of people here do not experience debt in the way that ordinary Americans do. They're wealthy. And so they don't, like, it's not a part of their life to struggle with like consumer debt and most Americans actually really do understand how bitter a burden it is to carry that. And this does jack all to address the experience and the economic agency of most of the country. And in fact, puts us back a long ways and exploding the deficit. And, I'm not, I, it was, yeah, it's like so many of the things that you hear that more conservative folks want. It was lip service to that and not addressing the structural issues we all agree on. Nobody really likes insurance. Okay? Like it's not fun, right? What we want is health. We want to be able to get 8 hours of sleep and eat real food and see our kids and see our parents and like have community and all the things that are the real determinants of national health. And what does this bill do? Like it's moving more capital to the hedge funds that are making it impossible for small businesses to, you know, operate independently, for young people to strike out on their own and start a small business, or for a young farmer to own the land they work on. And it was just, it's so disrespectful to me, to my community, that many of these cuts do not take effect until after the next election. If you're proud of what you're doing, why are you hiding it from everyone? And then it becomes this war of he said, she said, where, the worst parts of it hurting my rural hospitals, hurting our communities, like don't land in the most pernicious way until the table's already set for the next round. So,
What are you hearing locally from the third district in terms of what that could mean?
oh, well, my rural hospitals are really, it's a really, I mean, they're just in a terrible position. But, largely, like I feel like there's been a steady decline in the quality of life and economic agency of most Americans, and it just feels like a steady march and down a road we don't want to go. So, you know, it's um, it's this is not a good situation. This is not, that's understatement of the year.
I mentioned at the top that thousands of Trump voters did vote for you in the last election, and you've won twice in the third district, which is purple and pro-Trump. And because of that, you've become like this kind of oracle for the future of the Democratic Party in some ways. Like I've watched and listened to some interviews, and I feel like a little bit of desperation with journalists kind of saying, what is next? Like, do you see the future? Is the future Marie Gluesenkamp Perez and her approach? Just in our final few minutes here, do you like being put in that position? Do you ever get tired of being asked that, the direction of the party as a whole? And do you feel like any of what you're saying is landing?
Well, I mean, I am maybe a little more removed from a lot of the national dialogue than people might expect. Like, we still get our internet from a radio tower at home. It's not like I'm hanging out a lot online. Um, but
See, that just builds your mystique even more with these like Beltway people. Don't you see they find that
I,
fascinating?
I'm like, whatever, texting by carrier pigeon. No, I think I think that my hope is that we are able to listen more closely to our neighbors and like I think so many folks get in this like algorithmically smoothed experience of the world, and it's really isolating. And monoculture is not a good thing. And I think trying to listen with humility and curiosity, like that's where I want to see, or that's where I believe real power is in in politics. And I think um, you know, we we've got to find like what like where do we agree? Where are we using terms differently? Where are we conflating, definitions? And like, what do we want? Not just what we think we can get, but like, we want to be able to eat real food. Like, we want to be able to, get 8 hours of sleep and see our kids. And, you know, um, I I really believe in this sort of deliberative democracy where this is like there's so little discussion of what we view the good life to be. Um, and that's I think a real source of of loss of power in community and not just like name calling and righteous indignation. Like that's not getting us where we need to go, where we have the things that I think most of us want in life.
I know you got to go. It's a busy day there for you. Just really briefly, something you mentioned grabbed a lot of our attention here at Southside and KUOW because it was about how bright headlights are and how messed up that is. And when you talk about quality of life, it's impacting a lot of people's quality of life. Where does your effort to address that stand, just as a final thought?
Well, we're still looking at a lot of different things. There's some opportunity in some of the upcoming approach markups potentially. I think one of the problems is that a lot of people don't drive themselves here. They get driven, and I think if you're not experiencing it personally, and then everybody thinks that it's just them, and I get like some people are like, why is she talking about headlights? Like, shit's on fire. But I think if you cannot make progress in the small things, you lose the muscle memory of doing these bigger projects. And it is vital that ordinary Americans view policy as relevant to their lived experience and useful, and not some, navel gazing somewhere else in a swamp somewhere else, but like in the shared in the shared reality. So I know it sounds like dumb to a lot of people, but I think if you looked up in the hood, there's some utility and I would argue, necessity here. The rules haven't been addressed since before I was born in 1985. Like it just has not caught up. So
at the risk of sounding biased, I love the issue of bright headlights. And I think people can agree on that because it is blinding us and it is dangerous and we don't like it. So thank you for bringing it up. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. By the way, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.